Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm your host, Steve Bissell. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in therapy. I also talk to guests about therapy, their experience with therapy, and how psychology is present in many places in their lives. I also share personal stories. So please join me on this journey about therapy. Hi, and welcome to episode 74 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I am Steve Bissell. If you haven't listened to episode 73 yet, please do so because it is a chapter in my book called The Beautiful Mind Needs to Be Nurtured. But with Veterans Day being 2 days away, we thought we'd do a special episode. And obviously this comes from a regular on my show, Jay Ball. Jay Ball has been on here before. Jay is a veteran of the armed forces. And Katelyn, Dehey, who works with a lot of first responders, who sometimes there's a lot of first responders that have served in the armed forces. And I can't wait to hear her insight. And Jay's friend, Kyle Pursell, someone he felt that would be great to bring on the show. And I'm hoping that it's going to be a good conversation with him. Kyle also served in the armed forces. From what I understand, he may or may not share some stories in regards to his views on Veterans Day, mental health, and other things like that. So here is the interview. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 74 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. I'm Steve. One of the things that Jay and Katelyn had talked about, and I thought it was a great idea, we're about 2 days away from Veterans Day, and we always end up wanting to talk about it, and then we end up talking about first responders all the time. Today, I'm going to avoid talking about first responders altogether. And we have a special guest today that's never been on the show, which I'm really looking forward to getting to know him. So first things first, I want to introduce our newest guest because the other guys, you already know him. Who cares? Kyle, welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Kyle, 32 years old. I'm from the state of Massachusetts. I'm a Army combat vet, 8 years active duty service. I did 13 months in Iraq, and then I did 9 months in Eastern Afghanistan. So my first deployment was 2010 when I was 20 years old, and my second deployment was when I was 23 overall for 9 months. It was my second deployment.
All right. Well, welcome, Kyle. And it's interesting because Jay said, hey, Kyle wants to come on, wants to talk about veteran stuff. And I'm like, yeah, bring him on. So I'm very happy that you're here and thank you for your service. I appreciate that. I won't wait till Memorial Day to say that. Of course, that's a joke in case people didn't get it. Jay, how about you introduce yourself?
Jay Ball, been on this a million times before, but actually, what did you say? 7? It's already been 7
You're
times.
number 7. You're like my Bill Murray
7.
of David Letterman.
Never 7. It's like Groundhog Day all over again. United States Army veteran, was in a few years before Kyle. Going to be the big 4-6 soon, so a couple of years before him. Yeah, I'm just not too much about myself. I like talking about veterans issues and mental health, but I'm glad Kyle's here because he's got a great story to share, and he's an inspiration. He's not going to get into everything, but he's an inspiration of some of the things he's done and overcome.
Welcome, Jay. And Katelyn, how about you introduce yourself a little bit here?
Guys, I'm Katelyn Dehey. I'm a licensed mental health clinician. I work at Westboro Behavioral Health Care Hospital, and I run the first responder program there to include vets.
I was going to ask you, do you guys take on vets?
Yep. We have a couple of veterans in the program right now.
All right, great. Perfect. Happy that the program is taking off really good. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
So Kyle, how about we wanted to have you on because it's Veterans Day is when this comes out, will be 2 days away. And, I think that with Veterans Day and then the holidays right after that, there's a bunch of issues that come up for veterans. And if you want to share a little bit about your story, that's great. Obviously, I'm not asking you to say things you don't want to talk about because obviously I want to respect that. But I want to hear a little bit about your story and maybe tell me a little bit of what Veterans Day means to you.
Okay. I joined the service right out of high school. I graduated in 2008. And I can honestly say I never had, not that I didn't have the strive to join the service, but I never had like the push. Sadly, in 2008, my mom committed suicide 3 months after I graduated high school. So I didn't really have I had a full academic scholarship to go to school. And I knew that that wasn't like the play that I wanted to do. So I was like, oh, I'll join the service. So I walked in at 18 years old and looked at my recruiter and said, I want to go to war. My recruiter laughed at me and said, sign here. And 92 days later, I was in basic training. I went to Fort Knox, Kentucky. I was a Cav Scout. So I was a 19 Delta. So I did like long and short range reconnaissance for anybody that doesn't know that. I mean, after I got out of basic training, it's like roughly 12 days later, I was boots on the ground in Iraq. So I went total around 5 months. I went from a civilian to private and basic training to a private in Iraq with guys that I've, never ever deployed with, never met, and was working my way through it. As Jay knows, I mean, I was good at the service because I was already broken. Like I grew up with my mom. I didn't have a dad. I was already broken when I joined the service. So I excelled very well. I was very comfortable being uncomfortable. I could do what I was told. Like it was my, so I didn't really grieve in a sense of what had happened at home. So I was just working my way through that. I did my first deployment. It wasn't bad. I mean, it was the drawdown from Operation Iraqi Freedom to the changeover of the campaigns to Operation New Dawn. So it was a drawdown where we were helping the local security forces close fobs and stuff like that. So I came home, and it was the reintegration process where it was, okay, I've been gone for over a year. I was coming home. I was like trying to figure out, I created relationships with people and trying to work my way through that. Like I said, I didn't have quote unquote a family, like blood family. I had guys that I was in the service with. So, as you work your way through dealing with that and coming home and having all these emotions and almost relearning how to be in society. Like, I mean, I went from not driving a car for a year to, I was driving a Humvee for a year, being around people, and like, not that it was a traumatic deployment. It was just, working your way through that. So I did the train up, went to a bunch of schools, was working my way through the ranks. And then 2013 came along and they were like, hey, we're getting ready to deploy to Afghanistan. At the time, I had a wife. I don't have a wife anymore, but she was pregnant, and I found out she was pregnant, and I was like, well, I'm going to go to Afghanistan and you can deal with this on your own for 9 months. So I got on a plane and I went off to Afghanistan, and Afghanistan was a completely different animal. It wasn't anything that 3 years later you thought drawdown of Iraq, and what we thought was it was going to be the same way. And it was completely opposite. It was still the wild, wild west. I operated out of a forward operating base. So I was attached to a quick reaction force. And then I was also in charge of physical and outside security for my squadron commander. So I was a sergeant at the time. So I had my own fire team. Long story short, that was, what we were in charge of, transporting to and from, making sure his, security and his well-being was taken care of. And at 23 years old, where you've been in the service since you've been 18, you thought, you knew it all, and you had young guys, and then all of a sudden, the guys around you that start passing away. There was 3 guys total that passed away within our squadron. 2 of them I was very close with. I won't get into, what happened, but they were KIA, and it was definitely a very big wake-up call. We were working our way through deployment. July 13th of 2013, I was within, I would say, 4.5 feet of a 107 millimeter rocket. I was blown down the road roughly 35 feet. I was placed in a coma for a week. I had a traumatic brain injury, and that was my 4th one. And I was in a concussion care clinic recovering. And then I had extensive injuries. And, it definitely was, even now, I mean, being the age that I am and working through the days, I mean, I still have, I get, treatment for chronic headaches. I have the other, situations that I deal with personally that I've had to I've seeked, outside help with. And in the beginning, when it first happened, I was definitely like, oh, I don't need to, talk to anybody. I don't need to do anything. I don't, it's just, this is the way it's supposed to be. This is how I'm supposed to feel. I'm supposed to be angry. I'm supposed to come home from deployment and drink myself into oblivion and, not talk about it, not confide in anybody, and everybody feels like this. And so I was going through recovery and doing PT and going through that. And then that was going well, but everything else started to crumble around me. My wife at the time, we weren't getting along. We had a child. I was drinking a lot. I was just masking the problems that I had. I didn't want to take medication. I didn't want to talk to a doctor that thought they knew where I was coming from, what I was doing. I just thought, being hard-headed like that they no idea how I felt. They didn't know, they didn't understand, they never understand. So I got out in 2016. That's when my wife decided to leave me. And I mean, I call it I say what they call, I had a I had a staycation at the Bedford VA for a couple of days. I had a little rest and recovery, a little oversighted rest and recovery, if everybody knows what I'm talking about. So I worked my way through that. And then after that, I kind of was like, all right, this isn't working, and I really started, I was in the service. So I really started working out, watching what I'm eating, and put the alcohol down, and really started focusing on like what life is per day, not about, me and Jay have talked about it, like the 4-foot rule, not what's 25 feet ahead of you that day, but what's 4 feet in front of you and what you can control. And, some days it's an hour ahead, and some days it's, okay, I'll make it to lunchtime. And some days it's, okay, the next 5 minutes I have to work through, you know what I mean? So it's definitely, from where I am right now, from where I was, is a huge process, a huge thing. And I mean, it definitely is. I have my own outlook on it. And I mean, I've definitely voiced my opinion, is that where even now, the veterans that I meet, I mean, I know that me and Jay know some of them, I would say that their morals are there, but they're not selfless to that point where it's like when I was in being selfless. Like, I could not know your name, I could not where you're from, what your background is, but I knew that if you were in trouble, I had to take it. And if I had to take a bullet for you, if I had to do anything for you, I would. So the Veterans Day now is, I feel like everybody wants to throw on an Army sweatshirt or wear a Marine hat on Veterans Day, go drink 1,000 beers, where it's not like, I look at the whole thing as, what do they say? 1% of the population signs up for the service, whether you're black, yellow, green, red, orange, identify as an apple, whatever you want to do, that those people step in front, and as cliche as it is, they sign a blank check for the United States of America. And I take that personally, because I have bled for this guy. I was almost a star in Arlington, and I've expressed that, like, I was almost a number, like my child was almost living without a father that, was KIA. So I take that as like Veterans Day. Yes, some people will never understand. Some people don't have, I would say, not the brains, or they don't want to understand it. They don't want to put themselves or be comfortable, being uncomfortable, where you talk about things and you talk to people, and it's like, in the profession that I have, people will complain about the wildest, most mundane things. And, I'm not saying that someone's problem isn't the biggest problem, and it's not my problem, but when you sit there and you look at the big things, the big picture, it's like, I mean, I hate to be frank, but like, shut the fuck up, dude, because I don't care. I mean, like, it's just like, that's guys that I work with that I don't get along with, but I know if there's there's a problem, or there, even as a civilian, I feel like when you are placed in that, I don't know if it's quote unquote, I don't like the word, being like brainwashed, when you're in, like, how they brainwash you, or they say, but like, you take it seriously when they break you down, and then they build you back up, and you get to wear something on your chest that says the United States Army. You get to wear a flag every day. Like, that should mean something. That should be not just, oh, I can't wait to get out to collect a disability check, or I can't wait to get all these, I can't wait to go to college for free, or I can't wait to do this, I can't wait to do that. Yes, those benefits are good, but look at the big picture of why you signed up, why you went about it. So I would say Veterans Day is like when people, say thank you for being a veteran. Like, I do, I don't brush it off, but I do think that people do just say it just to say, because that's what they say. You know what I mean? Like, where you do get people that do genuinely mean it, but where it's Veterans Day, and it's like, we're 2022, and we all have a cell phone, and it's, I don't talk to people for 364 days, but 365 when it's Veterans Day, sure as shit, my phone's got 376 messages that make sure they let me know, so they can tell their friends. I have a buddy that's a combat vet, and I made sure I told him today that I was thankful for him. So, I mean, as Jay knows, I didn't put in the beginning, I am a very decorated combat veteran. I do have a Purple Heart. I do have.
That wasn't for a paper cut either, was it? I'm not discounting Purple Heart.
It was not for a paper cut, or spraining my ankle at, family football day where you were told to go. But it definitely is, like I said, I have a tight group of friends that know my beliefs, and they know how I feel about it, and they know, but I would definitely say that Veterans Day, and then, like, as you slowly work into the holidays, like, I mean, I know one of the things that I still struggle with is hugely, and I try to work my way through it, is survivor's guilt. I mean, I definitely, that's one thing that, I've had. I mean, I have like residual effects. Like I said, I have headaches. I can't feel my left leg. I have scars. I have scars on my face and on my back. But I had multiple doctors with all four of our brains combined that are medical professionals that look at me and, kid, I don't know how you're alive. I don't have, I have all my fingers, all my toes. And they looked at me multiple times and said, like, I don't know how you're here. So things, like I said, that happened to my friends, it just kind of sits with me like, okay, well, how come I'm definitely much better the way now than I was, but when I first came home, that was definitely a huge thing. And then as the holidays come around and their anniversaries and Memorial Day, that's definitely those are the days where they're 5 minutes at a time, not 4 feet. Those are, inches at that. So yeah, that's the gist of it. So
Don't tell him thank you for your service right now.
No, all I can think of is I don't want to thank him at all, period,
Yeah.
at this point. But truly appreciate you sharing the story, because I don't think I've ever had someone just take over and see the three others just riveted to your story. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. I have about 1,200 follow-up questions that I want to ask, but because I don't want to go anywhere else but to figure out about the hard part to me when you said, I don't need anyone. And you don't need to answer that if you don't want to. This is just like, that's a mentality that I find with a lot of vets, because I have my squad, I have my guys. I've never served. I'm a big pussy. I will always admit that freely. But when I get those vets and they say I don't want to reach out to the other guys, I'm like, but what about reaching out to people people you trust? Why is it so hard for a vet to kind of like, Jay served what, give or take 5 or 10 years before that? Why is it so hard to go see another
during the
guy?
Cold
Maybe
War, I think it was the Cold, or the North.
The
beat the
Cold
South.
War. Good Lord, I'm not 70.
I know exactly when it was.
World War II.
I think they were still shooting
I.
cannons.
World War One.
I think they were still shooting cannonballs, attacking black rifles.
Just go
for one
back to
shot.
muskets. Come on.
Riding horses,
Is that why you always say keep your powder dry? Is that why you're telling me that?
Don't you guys still have horses at Fort Knox?
We did. I rode horses. I wore a cowboy hat too. Say something.
Buckles on your boots. But anyways.
Well, I want to get back to my question.
Yeah.
Why is it so hard to reach out for maybe outsiders, or even like someone like I said, Jay obviously served. Why is it so hard to reach out to people and you don't need anyone? It could go to anyone, obviously. Anyone can answer that. But I want to ask you, Kyle, but you can defer to someone else if you want.
I mean, I would definitely say, I think it's just, we've definitely talked about it, but how long has mental health been a stigma? How often, or when you look at it and you say, hey, like, I'll openly say it, I take medication every single day, but it's not, I have to talk to somebody. So when someone asks me now, like, yes, you're right. I have one professional that does, talks to me, I talk to this way. I have another person I talk to this way. And then I have a group of friends now that I can talk to on a whole different realm. And when you say off the wall things, they understand that it's just you, being you. So I think for so long, and I would say that we have one of the best fighting forces in the world, but I feel like we were so behind the curve when it came to like mental health and physical health within the United States government, because it was just train, fight, come home, train. And the war was just so overwhelming, where it was just we were in Afghanistan for 22 years. We were in, Iraq for 10 plus years. And then we were fighting, on top of everything else that we don't even know about. And the amount of people that come home, that it's just where you have older command that looked at you like, oh, kid, you're fine. Like, throw a Band-Aid on it. Or, hey, I had these thoughts. Oh, just take some Motrin and drink some water and those thoughts will go away. You know what I mean? Or, where I think that it definitely now is playing such an effect of the amount of suicides that do happen, that we hear about overall, through the grapevine or in your profession, or, I know personally 5 guys that first and last name that took their lives, I'm not saying it was directly involved in what happened overseas, but overall being in the service and the things that were done and the things, how old school army. And even 2008 was an old school army, but it was much different than 2016 when I got out. So things that were going on and the way you were treated and But I would say that it definitely was kind of frowned upon to be like, hey, who's got a problem? If you raised your hand, well, then you were the odd duck in the room, and you were like, oh, all right, I'll drink beers on Friday night and we'll go away. You know what I mean? So it's
My experience is go talk to the chaplain or say if you have a problem. And then the next thing you know, you're not able to continue to serve. And sometimes that takes away a lot of that stuff. So that's my experience with the vets, and that's why they don't want to talk. I don't believe that stigma has changed, but I could be wrong. The last guy I knew was out in 2015, so my information may be a little old.
It's a couple of things that I put out in one of the classes I teach, and it's actually one of the classes Kate and I taught together. So when you left, we were one of the original groups to go into Bosnia back in the mid 90s. When we got to Hungary after deployment, it was a lot of moral injury over there in Bosnia, seeing things that were just nothing people were used to, especially in that time frame. But you get out. I remember being in formation, and our first sergeant basically saying the chaplains and psychological services are all over here, and the beer tent is over there. You take that, they say fall out, and you kind of look towards the tents and stuff, and you look towards that, and then no one's there, and you fall out and you go towards the beer tent, and you had out processing things to do. This was in Hungary. It was stigma at the time. Do I think we've come a long way? Another story I tell is someone that used to do a lot of self-harm, not suicidal. It was non-suicidal self-injury. He used to cut himself pretty bad, like horrendously bad. And it was someone asked me, I would always tell the story, and I preach in one of these classes, say something, help the person. Did you do this? Finally, after about 25 times of telling the story, someone in the class goes, hey, did you tell anyone? I'm like, you suck. Because I didn't. And that was probably 96, 97. And would I do it today? I'd love to say yes. And I would hope I did. But back then, no. I mean, what was I going to do? Get that kid kicked out of the military? Or were they going to label him or something like that? That's part of some of the stigma associated with mental health in the military. You're supposed to be this big bad warrior, and everyone is, but also there's a lot of mental health issues that no one wants to talk about. They just rather get the person out or label them crazy or label them something, and maybe that lands them out of the military. And some people, and I'm not picking on states or areas of the country, and Kyle can echo this. We met a lot of people from all over the United States, people that I go back to. I had a very good friend. He got off his first enlistment. He was from Minneapolis, got out, went back to Minneapolis. Family wasn't there. Not only was his family wasn't there, they didn't say where the heck they went. They ended up moving to Montana and not telling them. And he went back in, and he retired from the military. You've got people that are very poor in the military. It's everything. It's they always say the United States is a melting pot. The military, you've got everything. I learned so much from people and how people lived. Grew up in Lawrence, Mass. Okay, I'm from Massachusetts, but even I joke about this. They put this white stuff on my plate in basic training. And I looked at it. I'm like, what the heck is this? And a kid from South Carolina, I apologize to anyone listening from South Carolina, them are grits. That's what he said to me. That's all he said. Them are grits. I was like, okay, I guess that's what's in front of me. I'll eat. But there's so many people in there. You don't know. Like me, if I got kicked out, I know that I grew up, and I have no problem saying this, but the kids I grew up with, two of my best friends, both unemployed, both live with their parents, and they're pushing 50 years old. Would I have ended up that same way if I got kicked out? So you never know where you would end. Did I have something outside the military at the time? I will say doing my enlistment in the military changed who I was and gave me, I'm not a perfect person by any means, Kyle will tell you that. But I mean, it gave me an outlook and gave me a direction.
I can say that too.
And you could definitely say it. It gave me a direction to go in. So.
Oh yeah.
Well,
this is the wrong crowd to say that,
right? No kidding. But it gave you a direction. But sometimes when a person's stigmatized, say they get, turning right around in circle and they get kicked out of the military for something like that, or if their leaders, like Kyle mentioned, some of his leaders were probably as old as me, at the time, but that wasn't understood by my generation at the time.
There are two things. One, Jay, you said, in the military, you're supposed to be a big bad warrior, but there's mental health issues. And it really stood out to me because in my program, we've been talking a lot about dialectics. We do just some dialectical behavior therapy, and dialectics basically means that two things can be true at the same time, right? So instead of you're supposed to be a big bad warrior, but there's these things that you do as a big bad warrior that may affect your mental health. You can be a big bad warrior and struggle with what that means and what those things are, right? Like sort of replacing that word but with and, because it's not one or the other. They can both exist simultaneously and both be true at the same time. And I think that piece is that, like, just simple language is something that if we really focus on that, can change some of that stigma, because the stuff that you do as a big bad warrior in the military isn't normal stuff. Like it's not stuff that the average person does or knows how to do or will see. And so, but you're still a human as a service member, right? So you still have emotions and feelings. And so there has to be room for both. So that was one thing that came up when you were talking, Jay. And then I also thinking about, you said you knew, like, there are people in the military who were poor and didn't have anything to like return back to. And Kyle, you talked about, like, if your mother's passing, you, all right, gonna go to the service. I think a lot of people use the service as a, well, what else am I going to do? Right. Like they use it to cope with grief or use it to get away from a bad situation at home. Or I think that's happens for a lot of people. And so that in and of itself sets you up with a bunch of people going into the service who probably already have some stuff that they've dealt with, right? Because if you're joining the military to get away from something or to process grief that you've already had, then you're just piling the stuff that happens while you're in the military on top of that stuff that's happened prior to that service. I think that makes sense.
You got to also, how I think about it, and I hope you understand this is not meant as a judgment, but 1 out of 4 people will have a major mental illness at some point in their lives. Even though then less than 1% of the population enrolls in the military, you got to think a couple of them slip in. And they don't get to reach out for help, and they just get to bury it deeper and deeper until it's triggered. We've talked about this before. It's not the first trauma that gets you going. Sometimes it's the 27th one. And I don't know if that relates to a little bit of what you're saying, Kyle and Jay and Katelyn, but I just want to throw that out because that's what I see is that you can have someone who might have, a couple of things went wrong in their lives, whatever that is, and they want to join the military to run away from it, and they can run away from it. It works out for them. It's perfect. But for some, it doesn't work out that way. I think that for me, it's just like, how can we normalize mental health in a service in general? Because it's a double-edged sword in some ways.
It absolutely is. And some of this jumped in my head. I remember when I went to VA hospital and was talking to people, them showing me this PowerPoint. I actually just pulled it up on BattleMind. And I always saw that Kyle made a great, Kyle, being blown up and stuff. I still amazes me, but he always says, I still get my fingers, my toes, I get my arms, my legs. And that's the mentality of a lot of veterans. But Kyle, BattleMind, right? That presentation. You're familiar with that?
Yeah, I'm trying to. When you said, I'm trying to.
I'm gonna rip through it real.
Can you describe it for people who might not know?
Quick? Yeah. So BattleMind, like everything in the military, is an acronym. So these are all combat skills you possess while you're in the military, but translating them to civilian life. And it's funny, if you go through them, you look and you're like, wow, that's me. Wow, that's me. So buddies and cohesion, something you have in the military, and then withdrawal when you get home, withdrawal from people, not wanting to talk to people, staying away. Accountability. One of the things you have accountability in the military, maintaining control of your weapon, your gear, necessary for survival. But when you're at home, you become angry when someone messes with your stuff, or even if it's insignificant things. No one cares about this but you. And these are things that may never change. The first T, split-second decisions that we make. In combat, another thing, decisions are lethal in highly ambiguous environment. Kill or be killed. Anger keeps you pumped up, alert, awake, and alive. When you get home, the transition, you have a hostility towards others, inappropriate anger, assault, spouse abuse, snapping at buddies or NCOs. I mean, if you're still in the military, overreaction over to minor insults. A non-commissioned officer, so anyone that's enlisted. not an officer. But I could go on and on through Battle Mind, and just the transitioning skills. One big one is there's a couple of big ones. I mean, you have individual responsibility versus guilt, but one big thing that was in and it's not an excuse for me driving like a knucklehead, but you have non-defensive combat non-defensive combat driving versus aggressive driving. Bosnia, people would take, as crazy as it sounds, I mean, people would take landmines, farmers, and think they're doing the right thing, putting them on the side of the road, or there would be landmines on the side of the road. It's not like by the Geneva Convention or the way we do things in the military, there's a pattern for mines or whatnot. They're just there in many countries. And there's aggressive driving. Kyle could probably tell stories of, hey, listen, there's an attack and you just go. If people are in your way, you just go. And when you get back here, sometimes you'll pull over a veteran and you'll ask them, hey, what's going on? And I've had it once or twice where they legitimately weren't making an excuse in my job that they were driving aggressively for X, Y, and Z reason. They got caught up in the moment. They were thinking of previous life. So, but if you go through Battle Mind, you have a chance to look it up. It's a great program, especially veterans. If they're looking at how they're doing back here, if they're struggling with things, they'll look and it'll show you how to transition that skill from the military and keeping it, because what you learned is good, but it may not be great in the civilian world.
I'll link it in the show notes so that way if people want to go see it, they will be able to do so. But yes, does that resonate to you, Kyle? Does that resonate to you, Katelyn? What do you think about? Because I don't know what Battle Mind is. I will admit that.
Yeah, it definitely has. I mean, I don't personally, like I said, it coming back to circling back when we talk about not saying that you need anybody and I'm fine. When you first get home, you do the reintegration period. They say, hey, don't drive for a week. And Jay just made me think of a story. I get home, I get in the car, and my ex-wife at the time, she's like, don't drive. I was like, no, I'm fine. So I was stationed in southern Georgia, where 1 minute it's sunny and nice, and the next minute it's hurricane for thunderstorms, and it's thunder and lightning. And in the area I was in Afghanistan, we took a lot of indirect fire. So even now, I don't like to be outside when it's thunder and lightning, because I have memories and stuff like that. But and also because I was hit with a rocket, so there's that. So I try to stay out of.
He says it to me every time in such a way like it's I stubbed my toe. Yeah, I get it.
No big deal.
No big deal. Stubbed my toe, hit with a rocket. But anyways, I always have to say that when I talk.
So I'm getting in the car, and I was on Interstate 95 in southern Georgia, and the thunderstorms are breaking out. I'm in the fast lane, and I'm telling you, the loudest boom that I've ever heard prior to being in a conflict with the United States went off. And I went from the fast lane across 4 lanes of traffic into the grass. And I stopped. And like I said, I looked at my wife at the time, and she's like, what was that? And I was like, I heard a boom. I had to get out of the way. And she's like, all right, why don't we swap seats and I'll drive for the rest of the time? But it comes into the fact of where you think subconsciously, I was like, no, I'm fine. Like, what would happen me driving? Like, what honestly would happen me driving from point A to point B in a thunderstorm? Like I said, it could go within 5 minutes, it's over. And in that instance, thunder and lightning goes off, and I almost caused, a 10-car pileup on 95 with my, definitely, like I said, where it turns into like, oh, I'm fine. I don't need. And where now I see where they say, hey, give it a week, give it a couple of days before, you start, slowly work into it, where it's definitely, and I would say some of the things too, definitely with that. I mean, I wouldn't say I have the most patience in the world. I try to have a lot of patience, but it doesn't always, we don't always get there. But even with just, how it correlates to the civilian world and what you take and how you act. And I mean, like I said, even Jay, like we think it's not, I don't even like to use the word, but we think it's normal behavior now. Like the things that we do, we consider like normal behavior. Where I say like, oh, that's just normal. And people look at me like, all right, dude, like you're a lunatic. And I'm like, no, this is normal. Like, what? Like, no, you don't feel like this, you don't feel like this. And people are like, no. I'm like, do you talk to somebody? I'm like, actually, I got like 4 or 5 people I talk to, you don't feel like this stuff. But I feel like I said, I don't like to use the word normal when I bring it into it, but what is almost like your new baseline of what it prior used to be. Like, I mean, I have buddies that stayed in contact with over, through high school. I'm a different person from high school to when I came back from Iraq, to when I came back from Afghanistan, to when I came back to who I am now, like in working my way through it. So it's definitely, I would definitely say some of the things that, you do bring back. And I mean, but some of the things that are harder to, would say, are definitely harder to manage than others for some people. Some people might not have certain things that trigger them, or, you know what I mean? Or this doesn't bother them and that doesn't bother them, but someone else might. Like I said, thunder and lightning, we don't get along. So,
Which the whole experience of being in the service changes your worldview and the lens at which you look at things, right? So it makes sense that you feel like it's normal because your whole sense of the world has changed. And so to this new normal, like you said, and I think it makes sense that have the experience of most veterans.
one of my good friends, he was also injured in Afghanistan. He's actually, I won't go into detail, but he works for the federal government. He has one eye, and he's, definitely worked his tail off to get where he's at in the position that he's in. And we were just talking about it the other day when we, checking with each other, and he was going back and forth, and we were saying that if I wasn't a veteran, or like the things that happened to me, definitely I would have, quote unquote, a harder time looking at somebody being like, okay, Katelyn was just saying with the lens, how I was and how I acted when I was in high school and the things. And I mean, I definitely joined at a younger age, and you think you're 18 and you can buy a scratch ticket, you think you're a man and you don't need anybody. But being now, you know what I mean? Like being now, and the things that happened to me, and what in the situations that I was faced with, I was talking to him and saying, would it be harder to understand? You know what I mean? Like you said, Steve, you're not a veteran, but I mean, I can't speak on that. But when you say like this happens, but do you have something in your that you can relate to, where it's, I know some people that I know personally, their goldfish guppy could die, and that's catastrophic. And then I sit there and I'm like, all right, well, I feel like I have the same feelings when this happens, but my threshold is 100 times what your threshold is. So like we were just, we were discussing it because the guys in his capacity and what he does for work, there's a lot of guys that voice their opinions about how tough life is. And my man's got one eye. He's 33 years old. When he doesn't take it as that and take it as what, hey, poor me, but it's like, all right, know your crowd and who you're talking to in a sense. You know what I mean? Like, I definitely feel like that's some of the problem too, is like, know your crowd. Me and Jay have been in the same crowd where we look at each other and we're like, this guy definitely doesn't know his crowd. And Jay can know exactly what I'm talking about. This guy definitely doesn't know his crowd and who he's talking to, but I'm not the type of person to sit there and, check him, because if that's how you feel or that's what you think.
And I think that's why, like, when you do the podcast, Jay and Katelyn know, and I did the same thing to you. I'll interrupt you because we got to assume that people don't know.
Yeah.
And that's why I say always, may not be the same thing as you, but I always say, know your crowd. Some people are listening to this for the first time. They want to be supportive of vets or what have you, and they have no clue what we're talking about. So that's why I always interrupt you guys. Hey, what does that mean? What does that mean? Just because it's important that the crowd understands. And I call it knowing your crowd also in my job, because if I'm talking to a bunch of teenager, I'm going to talk way differently than I talk about to a bunch of military or veterans than I'm going to talk to adults who have been assaulted or some sort. I mean, it's a different language you're going to use. And so I get that, but I think it's important for people to understand that, because the threshold is so important, because for some people it is that goldfish dying. And for some people it's like, oh yeah, I have one eye and you're telling me about your guppy. It's kind of heavy handed to say that to a person like that.
Kyle, tell me if I'm wrong when I'm done, but everyone talks about bias, and we're not going to get a big conversation about, I don't know, best words to say along the lines of bias, but I find myself sometimes surrounding myself, and at our job, we have a pretty strong group of veterans, smaller cliques with inside that group of veterans at our job. But I always think of sometimes there was a lot of stuff put in me in the military. And one thing is not being scared. I remember growing up in Lawrence, and there was fights you couldn't avoid. Not that I was in fights all the time. I was a wicked skinny kid. I wasn't looking for a fight. But what the military changed in me was, one thing was though I don't want my wife to be without, a husband, or my kids to be without a father, I'm not afraid to die. It doesn't scare me. And when we go on a search warrant or when we go on something, I said we won't get into the policing, but I just want to bring it to context. I'll have Kyle. And I could name them by name. I'm not going to certain people. And it's not a bias against non-military members, because there are some non-military members that hey, let's go. But I think it's just this, maybe an unconscious bias. I know that Kyle's going to watch my six. I know that so-and-so is going to do this and do that. Do I want to die? No, but I'm not afraid. And I know if I surround myself with people like Kyle and other guys that I work with, it's no snub to non-veterans, but it's hard to explain. But I know I'm going in to do a mission or do something with a person that's like-minded as me. I know I don't have to look over my shoulder and I've got Kyle there, I've got so-and-so there and this one there, and we don't want to die, but we're conditioned that, listen, we've got a job to do. Okay, we're not developing board games. We're not playing tiddlywinks. We do a job that involves firearms and going after bad people. And I surround myself with like-minded people, and that's something that was ingrained in me in the military. So that's one thing I just want to say. Was like, everyone's different threshold. People hear me say one of my coping strategies when someone passes away is people die. It's a horrible thing to say, but people die. I think it's just one of those things that gets ingrained in you as a veteran that some people that weren't in don't understand.
Well, don't worry. My daughter went into school and someone had passed away. And my daughter says, well, technically we're all dying. And I got a phone call for that. And so, because that's why I tell people we're all dying, really. Some of us faster than others, but ultimately we're all dying. And when they called me, I said, what did she say wrong? And they're like, oh, we'll call their mom. And thankfully, my ex-wife was very supportive about that. But that's kind of like, sometimes you got to have that mentality, in my opinion, anyway. And the other thing that I want to throw out, Kyle, I know that Jay had asked you directly, but can I just turn to Katelyn for a second? Because the language you just used, I'm not afraid to die. If you hear that from a civilian population or people who are in a different place, I think that for some therapists, they would like freak the hell out. And so I want to talk a little bit more about the treatment. And does that, like, knowing, we talked about it in the last podcast, but let's talk about the military knowledge and also having that, what was the word we used? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, that cultural competence.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Thinking about, like, I'm not afraid to die. When you're dealing with as a therapist, if you're dealing with a civilian population with no type of military background or first responder background, it could make certain therapists feel uneasy, like, oh, well, what does that mean? And tell me more about that. Like, are you thinking of having thoughts about killing yourself and that kind of thing? And certainly with people that come to me in treatment, if they're military and they say they're not afraid to die, I'm certainly going to explore that and make sure that we're in a safety place where we're safe, right? Because that's important. But the threshold that there's that word again, threshold, right? The threshold that I'm going to use for somebody saying that who's been trained to be okay with that is going to be different than the threshold I might use for, say, an adolescent, right? Like, that's, you're going to be a little more concerned about that. Well, why not? Are you having thoughts about that? I'm going to think about it in maybe a different lens. And I also think that I too am not a veteran. I have zero actual understanding of anything either you, Jay, or Kyle have been through in that regard. And I think, one of the things that makes it hard thinking about Veterans Day, and people want to thank their veterans and that kind of thing. But the piece about it is that civilians don't have any understanding of the things that you're trained to do, the things that you see when you're deployed, the things that happen when you're in combat. They don't have it. We don't have any idea of what that actually looks like, feels like, smells like, tastes like. None of it. We got none of that actual understanding, right? And most civilians don't want to. Some of it's atrocious. People don't want to know what those things actually feel like and what those things actually smell like, right? They don't want to know those things because how are they going to sleep at night, right? That's the sort of civilian lens, I think, so they don't try to understand because, well, that's like intense. I don't want to talk about that. And so I think that's where that cultural competence piece comes in. That's important for veterans talking to therapists is, yeah, like, I don't know. I have no idea what you guys have actually been through, but you can tell me all the things and I'm not going to be offended and I'm not going to get scared and I'm going to listen, right? I'm going to listen and I'm going to work through the feelings you have around those things with you. But for somebody who's a therapist who hasn't worked with first responders or hasn't worked with veterans, that can be a hard space to sit in and listen to people talk about some of these trauma that comes from combat service. I think it's definitely not for all the therapists out there to do that kind of work.
One thing, and I want to say because you brought into a good thing, having Katelyn say this about the therapy is, listen, I got a plan. I got a plan that I want to retire. I want to move to Spain. I want to live till 100 years old. But when I say a statement like that, I think that line is, I'm not going to go into a place where I'm either have to protect someone or go get a bad person or whatnot. And I think that being scared or being afraid in that line, I think that takes away from you doing your mission. Kyle, if you want to elaborate on that, if you agree or disagree, but sometimes you see people apprehensive, and I don't want you to be apprehensive. I want you to think it out and do the safe thing. But for example, and like I said, we'll get into policing, but search warrants. I'd leave the house. I would tell people, oh yeah, we went and did a gun search warrant today. My wife would be like, oh my God, blah, 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 blah. You know, she'd be worried. But to me, it's like, whatever. People got guns. We're going to go do it safe. We're going to go complete the mission. Do I want to come home? Absolutely. Do I want to do this? Absolutely. But if I don't, it's an unfortunate event that happens. Kyle, I don't know if you want to elaborate on that.
Obviously, like you said, we're not getting into that side of, work and stuff, but there's been instances where you stand there and guys are like, oh, we got to wait. And I'm like, well, I'm not waiting. So, you can wait now, but I'm comfortable in my capabilities. Like, I'm comfortable in the skills that I have and the things that I bring to the table, where I know some guys on the civilian side, where I am the type of person that respect and manners is a huge thing, and no one's going to disrespect me when I'm out in public. Like, I have a 9-year-old that's very respectful, and if my 9-year-old's respectful, then you're going to be respectful. I have guys that are afraid to send food back because it's cold. Oh, I don't want to, and it's like something as small as that. But I mean, someone doesn't say excuse me in a store, like, they're going to hear, like, something's going to come out of my mouth, and that's just who I am as a person, and that's just like what I've, I'm not saying that I'm a jerk about it every time, but where we do, like I said, in that aspect where like you said, I'm not afraid to die, but I'm not, like, I don't do reckless things.
We don't want to, but
yeah, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like, I'm on a motorcycle with no helmet, driving 150 miles an hour, or cage fighting great whites and stuff like that. But saying that overall with...
You would cage fight a great white. Oh.
Yeah, I think I actually would. I do. I take that. I think I actually would do that. But I'm saying, even at work, where it's like, and I was just getting back to that whole, and it incorporates, like, people being selfless and people having those morals, and knowing that even in the job that we have, and brings back to the fact, like, it's something bigger than yourself, because at the end of the day, you still have to protect Bob down the street that you've never met, talked to once. But in that time, if it's your time to do what you have to do, you have to do it. And there are some guys that are very apprehensive and very slow to, I'm not saying that they wouldn't do it, but they're very slow to that. I mean, obviously, it's different being a veteran, being in the military, because it's like, okay, you pop me in the bean, good shot. But I'm haunting you when I'm, it happens. Like, it does, it happens. Like, it is what it is. I mean, I'm not saying that it's not tragic and awful. And when you see these, even, with knowing people that, were KIA in the military and stuff, the wives, they are upset, are very sad for their children, but they take it as like, I mean, obviously my friends, but my husband knew what he was doing when he was doing it. He wasn't being reckless. He wasn't looking for a medal. He was doing what he had to do in that moment. And when you can look back, and I do keep in contact with the wives, and they do take it as very honorable when you sit there and know that someone put themselves above everybody else besides them. They were the last person they thought about, and it's just definitely it's not even a touchy subject. It's just, sometimes it drives me crazy, and other times I just accept it. And,
It's a different set of values. When you go through military training, you're ingrained with a different set of values than most civilians have, right? Not that some civilians don't have similar values, right? That I don't want to say that, but it's very different. The values that you're operating from, the principles you're operating from are not like the ones that civilians operate from all the time. And so then you're in that world for such a long period of time, and then you come back and you're plopped into this world where only a few people here and there that you come across are people that have those same values as you. And so having to interact with those people and deal with that is a big culture shock, right? It's like a big culture change that you have to navigate. And I think that that's challenging.
Yeah, it definitely is, because then you feel like the odd man out when it's like, okay, this is how I feel, but you're in a pool of 10 and two of you feel this way. Like you said, you sit there and now it's like, okay, well, now we're the odd ducks out, but this is just who we are. It's not that your values or what your outlook is. Because I mean, like I said, I have buddies that I'm very, very, very good friends with that would never join the military. They came out flat out, I would never do what you did. I'm too afraid. I want to sit and don't want to do that. I wanted to go to college. I want to sit, in a cubicle. And, when I take that, you know what, you're absolutely. But they don't also, when I look at me and I have my values, and when I speak my mind, they know that I'm not the odd man. I don't feel like the odd man out, because it is what it is. But like you said, the general consensus is, sit in a room with 10, two of you guys have an outlook. You guys are the odd man out. And that's not, but that's, everybody's got, like you said, I mean, but me and Jay being in the military, me and him valued things a little bit differently anyway. Something that's more important to me is probably less than him, or more important to him is less than me, but I mean, I feel like the baseline of being in the military, that's always that baseline of what.
Right. And I think that we're getting close to the hour. This has been a fantastic conversation. I hope people get a whole lot of it. I want to come back to a couple of things. There is a strange bond that is a bond, but also kind of like when you had a couple of friends had a KIA, and you have the bond with that family afterwards. Sometimes that can be triggering for other people. Sometimes it can be difficult for them because it's not an easy thing to do, but you don't ever want to abandon them because you know that they gave their lives and they're forgotten on a regular basis. That's what I kind of find a whole lot of times is that, oh, thanks. After 2 weeks, I always tell people that if 2 weeks later, that's when you check on people. You don't check in within the first 2 weeks. They got all the food. They got all the check-ins in the first 2 weeks. Check in on the third, fourth, fifth, sixth week. And wanted to share that because I think that part of what you're talking about, I don't check in on my military clients or friends on November 11th. That's just one day. I don't really care. And do I care because it's Veterans Day? Of course. But that's the other thing that I find that happens is that people don't get that. It's not just checking on them on Veterans Day. It's checking on them on a regular basis. And so I want to go to you, Jay and Kyle, and then Katelyn also, obviously. How do we get people to get maybe, coming back from whether it's, combat or not, by the way, just serving in the military is just a good thing. How do we get people to come back and get some support, number one? And number two, for the record, I just need to say this because this is important. When you talked about competency, one of my other things we've talked about in a different context, I find that therapists who go, hey, can you tell me a story? No, they don't want to tell you a story. They want to talk about their problems and they don't want to give you a story. That's why, Kyle, I did not ask you about a story. Jay, I did not ever ask you about a story, nor will I ever ask you for a story. But wanted to throw about how do we get the treatment for people who are coming back, served in combat or not, frankly. How do we get them to lift that stigma in mental health once they become civilians?
I would start, and something I preach all the time. We need our leaders to buy in. No one came into the United States Army as Command Sergeant Major. No one came into the United States Army as a 4-star general. All right, everyone's got their own beliefs on mental health. People can believe that's the same as whole body health. People can say, no, it's a weakness. I implore to the leaders of the military to understand that you've got soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors. They're struggling. They've got a lot of things going on. Let's see when they actually have their struggles, to the probation officers out there and the clinicians. If you're only talking to your client, or you see your client as a probation officer in November and December every year for 4 straight years, that should probably be what we call a clue. And I could do a little stand up with Kyle knows exactly what I'm talking about. The clue. It's a clue. Okay, what happened in November and December? Was it something as simple as they were deployed during the holidays? Or did something really, really bad happen that triggered that veteran? Ask these questions, okay? When you don't see someone in April and you don't see someone in January, but they're having those struggles certain times of the year, look into that. But I want to point towards the leaders. Do something. Don't be that leader that stigmatizes, and then you sit there. And I don't want to pick on the San Antonio Police Department, but they've had a rash of suicides lately. And I'm not pointing fingers at their chief, but do something, okay? For some reason, they're struggling and they don't feel like they can get help, is my opinion. And I know I'm not the only one with that opinion. So I'll shut up now, but leaders, please, please, please take care of your soldiers, take care of your sailors, your Marines, your airmen. That's it.
Yeah, I was definitely going to spin off of that. I mean, it definitely, like I said, I mean, it comes into I have my own outlook on like the VA healthcare system and the way that, where I'm not saying every instance I've had is a bad instance or a bad situation where I've had to deal with X, Y, and Z, but I feel like the mental health aspect of the VA and dealing with that side of the VA and what you have to do. I mean, you could go in there and be like, hey, I'm in crisis, or I need to talk to somebody. And they're like, all right, well, we can get you an appointment 4 weeks from now. How does Tuesday sound? And it's like, okay, well, and it's not even that happened to you, because could happen to me. And then Jay could be thinking about, hey, I want to go get some help, but it's going to take me a month to get an appointment. Like, why would I go do that if I'm just doing what I'm doing now? So I feel like it's definitely and I have read some articles where they are auditing the VA and how long it is taking to get an appointment. And obviously there's been times where people have come out where it's been months and years. It's definitely, but I definitely feel, same what Jay said, the leaders, and it's sad to say, but everybody puts that that cap on mental health, but then when someone ultimately does commit suicide or something does really bad happen, everybody's shocked when, like you said, Jay, there's all these clues. You just have to be able to open your eyes and not be ignorant. I hate to use that term, but ignorant to the fact of what's really going on. Like looking at the overall, like you are in that position, whether you're a boss at a corporation or a manager at a supermarket or whatever it is, you're in a position to make sure that your men are taken care of. And then when it's like, in our profession, we see probably more than we see our families. I see guys at work more than I see my son, and we have that relationship. So when something's off, something's off. So if you're not, I definitely feel like it definitely takes it falls on the leaders, and obviously, but it also, like you said, it falls on the person, like, and the veterans listening or whoever listens, like what I say is you got to stop caring about what everybody else thinks, because it's only you and it's about you. And it's always going to be about you, because Steve, you're not going to help me. Jay, you're not going to help me. Katelyn, you're not going to help me. But you guys could give me the tools, but it's up to me to do the work myself. And I have to want to do that work. So it's definitely falls into that realm where you guys might all have something that I can help that helps me through a situation. But unless I sit there and say, hey, I want to be better today, tomorrow, the next day, and healthy for my child or my family, or being at work and being happy, then that's ultimately what's going to make or break you, because no one's going to do the work unless you do it. So
I like that. Katelyn, what do you have to say?
I think, Kyle, you make a good point about like being ready to do the work, right? That's a super important part of this therapy thing, right? Because otherwise it's not really going to work if you're not ready to put in the time and the effort. But I do think like to really change the stigma, and it has to start at the top down. Like you guys said, like it has to just be thinking about the military as, yes, they are military service members. Yes, they are warriors, and they're human beings. And they not only have the stress of what they do in the military, but they have lives outside of that, right? They have siblings, they have parents, they have kids of their own, they have spouses. And those things don't exist in a microcosm outside. These things exist at the same time. And so you have the stress of whatever's happening in the military, or you're deployed, and back home, somebody in your family gets sick with cancer, or somebody dies, or so like, it's not just mental health. Like, mental health isn't just about like the trauma that happens in the military, but it's also about like grief and loss from life, and marital issues, and things that just happen in life. And so you're not exempt from those life things just because you're in the military. And so thinking about it really as, yes, absolutely, there's that military cultural piece with trauma that is intense, but there's also your life outside of that, right? With other things that are involved. And so trying to get leaders to think about it in that way, and think about the mental health being just as important as the rest of the physical health. And you want these people that are going out and doing these important missions to be as healthy as they can be, right? I don't know, it feels like that would be a good thing to have those people be, in the best healthy shape they can be. And that includes their mental health. And I think that's an important piece of it.
I'm going to touch base on a few things that everyone said here. Let's start off with, start with what you talked about. Getting out in the military doesn't mean you have PTSD. I'm sick and tired of that automatic thought process. I have that regularly. And even guys from the military come to see me, you're going to give me PTSD? I'm like, I don't know yet. And frankly, I don't care about diagnosis. You're here for help because you're having XYZ issue. I don't care about the diagnosis. So I wanted to talk about that. You mentioned about being, our leadership. I think it's also colleagues and people around you, because, I just saw this on a graph maybe a couple of weeks ago. In our 30s, 40s, and 50s, we spend more time at work than we do with our own families or friends or leisure. And so they're going to be the first ones who are going to be able to look at it, whether it's our leaders, whether it's our colleagues, whatever. I think that that's important to remember. And again, Jay said I bragged that I don't have any openings. But if I get a call from anyone who has a military background, I return that phone call probably within 24 hours. But I tell people, if you do it past 72 hours, you're wasting your time because you've lost them. So when you talked about the VA being backed up and all that, sometimes I'll use something, and there's no other plug that I use this. Sometimes I do give an hour, which is something that, you give an hour for military personnel. Any therapist can do that. You can go check it out if you want to, giveanhour.org, I believe. But make sure that you try to catch the military before they get to their appointment. Sometimes I'll say, hey, I'll hold you for the next 4 weeks or 3 weeks, or with the Bedford VA, 9 weeks. Sorry, did I say that out loud? But at the end of the day, I think it's important to just be there, even if it's just as I'd rather be a stopgap and be helping in that way than thanking a veteran on November 11. And what I've learned today is I will never thank Kyle for his service. That's just the bottom line for me. So thank you, Jay. Thank you, Kyle. And thank you, Katelyn. This was a great conversation. And I will never thank you, Kyle, so I'm not even saying it. So thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Well, this concludes episode 74 of Finding Your Way Through Therapy. Again, thank you to Jay Ball. Thank you to Katelyn Dehey. But more importantly, thank you to Kyle Pursell. It was a great interview. Really enjoyed it. We talked about different things that I think that most people don't talk about. And to all of those who listened, I hope that you realize what Veterans Day may mean for a veteran. And for those who have served our country, remember there was a lot of good advice on there. And I'm hoping that you follow some of the stuff that Kyle, Jay, and Katelyn talked about. Episode 75 will be with Lisa Mustard. Lisa is someone who helped me get into doing podcasting. I consulted with her when I started, and someone I've listened to for about 2 years. So I'm looking forward to that interview, and I hope you join me then. Please like, subscribe, or follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for information, educational, and entertainment purposes. If you are struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor or therapist for consultation.